Well, thank you for the invitation. It was very useful to have heard from Nono how we've had a response in the setting of South Africa and regionally. I have been asked to speak a little bit about the role of the community in science and how this has come about over the years. Michel Sidibe, in many opportunities, has been repeating this, that learning from the community was more than anyone else in this journey. I think that it is certainly quite true that we have had a community between all the players who have been active in the response to HIV. And I'll start from the end. And what I think that the community and the informed patients and advocates have done and achieved is starting from the basic things we had to do with the co-decisions about someone's health, but also making sure that treatment information was turned into lay language and reached everybody. We have done scrutiny of how money is being used for research in the beginning, and now sit on grants review across all these agencies that you see listed there. We have been involved in monitoring and participating in drug development and clinical research, both that performed by industry or by public funded research. We have joined scientific committees and community advisory boards, guideline panels, and indeed editorial groups for prestigious magazines. We have become invited experts and even members of regulatory agencies on the governance, and the same is true also for historically and in some cases even today in major research-focused organizations where they were community-led, their executive directors, and of course certainly both on their board of directors and the advisory groups. And international organizations increasingly community patient representatives have been involved at all the advisory and consultations, and indeed, again, on the governance, like in Unitaid, Medicines Patent Pool, and so on. This was, as we all know, what led to this from the moment that HIV emerged. These are data from the US. It became the leading cause of death for men between the age of 20 to 44. It affected young people because it was sexually transmitted. Obviously, the most active people sexually would be the first to be targeted. In the case, as we know, of the US, of course, it was gay men. But this was the image that we knew, what the community knew. We didn't know of graphs. We knew of our friends and our colleagues and people who were around us who were affected by this disease, which was scary. We didn't know what caused it. And of course, soon enough, these images from the developing world were also obvious to us. Very early on, in 1983, even before the cause of AIDS was identified, people living with HIV, people living with AIDS back then, HIV didn't exist, we collected, and what we said, we want no decisions to be taken about us, without us. We wanted to be involved at all levels and also be taken seriously, as you can see, number 3, because we had the experience. And how did we acquire that level of sophistication that would allow us to engage with all those agencies that I showed to you before? And remember, all of that was happening during the 80s, where we had Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom. And of course, it took quite a lot of work. And this could only happen because people who were young, who were college dropouts, were handed down a death sentence. So you were simply going to die. What is it that you're going to do about it? I mean, of course, in our eyes, they are heroes, but they had no choice as well. here I just show please notice the right-hand side of this red line. How did this happen? This was the result of the highly effective antiretroviral treatments. We hear that every molecule needs around 10 years to reach the market. Imagine how hundreds of years would have been required to have performed research for all of those. And here you see the same person you saw before. On the left, it is March of 2003, and on the right is just September. Here you see the effect of the combination of antiretrovirals and TB medication, and what is the impact, which is incredible to think that people are denied of access to such an effect in their lives. Going back to what I was describing, there was this individual type of attitude. People just did not want to die. They resorted to all sorts of things, import drugs illegally, perform clandestine clinical research, comparing anything to whatever, garlic against prednisone. It's just all that they could do. But of course, the other way, and the more effective one, was community mobilization. Here you can see the ACT UP logo, silence equals death, and there is this amazing documentary which I recommend all of you to see, where it describes how can one survive during a plague, what were the necessary steps that the community undertook in order to become effective in change. And indeed, the ACT UP sessions that were taking place, they recognized that they had to develop this sophistication in order to be able to challenge the authorities, in order to be able to collaborate with scientists, and again, a film that shows all this. That led to these demonstrations that we have seen, one in 1988 with the FDA. We were all exasperated with the huge delays and the process, which was so convoluted with the regulatory authorities. The question of where does the money go, was there enough interest and allocation? And in both cases, in other cases as well, what it took was also people with vision working there and reaching out to the community and giving us the opportunity to engage, inviting us when we were half ready, but then we became fully ready by the time that we participated in all of those things. And this led to community advisory boards being created in all these agencies that you see. Most of them are in America, clinical trials, prevention trials, vaccines. But the same was true also in the UK with the Medical Research Council, as it is today also with the one in South Africa, the French ANRS, and other numerous industry-created advisory boards in the 90s, which were either drug-specific or trial-specific. At that time, my organization was created, the European AIDS Treatment Group, and we wanted to ensure the fastest possible access to state-of-the-art medical products and also prevention products. Again, training and capacity building for science was a necessary step at all points. This was one of the first things that I read when I joined the group in 1997. This was a compilation created by the community, and it was circulating every 15 days, posting all articles and abstracts and reports from conferences. So even doctors were informed, at least in Europe, Julio, from a community-based, which came out then only on fax every 15 days. It was an amazing resource, and of course we were all reading it. The community was reading that. What was a novelty that the Europeans did was that we created an independent community advisory board which met in a hotel every month, and we invited and we said to everyone, you come to us. You tell us what you want to discuss, and we will be ready for you. And in order to do that, and you can see the dual objective was both to advise the research community on the needs and appropriateness of proposed research, but also advise the community on the aims and expectations of the research proposals to make them acceptable and understandable to the community. We did this by having all this type of trainings and lectures through renowned scientists, but also by training ourselves. And so this novelty was that we did not belong to any agency or to any company. We were independent, and we invited. This was replicated then back in the US and with the World Community Advisory Board, which is the global community. Here you can see an example of what happens when this process of consultation does not take place. There were trials being conducted on microbicides in Africa, and exactly because the process of consultation had not taken place, they were stopped, and Gates and Gilead and all those involved were accused of using the community. That led to, among others, the AVAC, which was then known as the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition. Now it has moved on to prevention in general. They had the most experience of engaging communities in the developing world on acceptability and understanding of how clinical trials work. So they created this good participatory practice, giving guidelines to researchers and agencies on how to engage with the community in order to make sure that everything was streamlined, and of course to improve the protocols. You can see this translated how the researchers mentioned that we developed the concept of the protocol using the methods of the good participatory practices. So in other words, we have consulted and engaged with the community. And so you see that in the research level, then you see how the community spoke about, in this case, the pre-exposure prophylaxis and how this is a critical thing. So entering into what we would call also the social sciences and what are the implications and how shall we achieve and do this. And indeed this led to the regulatory approval, which, as I have indicated, we have been involved increasingly over the years. And then on guidelines. So you have the science, the regulatory, and then the practice. And all of this, at any step, the community has been there pushing for it. The Last Frontier, HIV Cure, the initiative undertaken by IAS and Françoise Barrès-Sinoussi, where she made sure from the very beginning to engage with community at all levels, and not only the science, I meant the medical science, but also the social science, the affordability issues, and so on. Finishing, I want to recapitulate what I have been running through fast so that I can also hear Mr. Horton's presentation, is that I think that we have a new paradigm for science that has been developed, where the community engages from drug and clinical research to social science to implementation science, a new science that is being developed. How can you possibly speak about implementation science without talking to the people who are on the ground and making sure that you have their feedback? And indeed, epidemiology and disease burden. And evidence-based policy, which is what we can jointly ask for. So I think that we have now a community which includes the science, the people who work in development agencies, the people who, together, we have to be in a constant collaboration, develop and understand each other, and together fight for what we want to achieve. Thank you very much.